Andy?
I'm good. And I tend to like my coffee dark with a bit of cream. And I don't know about you, but I prefer that kind of symphonic sound as well, a darker, richer, more resonant sound. And there are a lot of different approaches to ensemble sounds depending on style, depending on the venue, depending on a lot of different parameters. But I think the key is when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And most accepted symphonic sounds, at least in the band world, are the richer, the more resonant, the darker, the warmer, the better. And so, have you encountered groups before where the players are really good, but maybe due to mouthpiece setups or just conceptual ideas in their mind as to what they've been exposed to, their sound tends to be on the brighter side?
Yeah, I did run into a couple of groups like that over the last month or two here, doing some festivals and things like that. And one of the groups I was talking to, it was kind of hard to explain to the kids. I mean, you're a wind player. I'm not, which you can probably talk about setup way better than I can. But I just got the feeling that everything was a little overdone. And on one of our other coffee talks, we were talking about overdoing articulation. I don't think that was the case here. I think it was the way they were using the air. And I want to say, and you have to be careful here because I know that you need to keep the air moving, but sometimes I think groups use air at too fast of a rate. And so, therefore, and I think people do it unintentionally maybe because it can make you sound pretty confident. And this group, this one particular group I was working with a few weeks ago sounded very confident, but they constantly sounded very bright. So it was hard to get a feel for their center of sound. It was hard to get a feel for intonation. Um, it made it very hard to listen to the group to hear chords and melodies. And to me, that's always my common denominator. If I hear just band sound and don't hear chords and melodies, I know something's not set up correctly. And sometimes kids will look at me like I have 10 heads when I say something like that. Because I'll say, yes, we want to hear your trombone. Okay. Yes, we want to hear your flute. But what we'd rather hear is your trombone producing melodies or part of a chord, or your flute producing melodies or part of a chord. So we just got to be careful about sound. And one of the things I think is very important is the sound that you have in your head. What is the sound that you want your group to have? And depending on your experience level, maybe you have some different examples.
Yeah, I think so much of it has to do with the compression of the air, the vowel shapes that they're potentially using.
Mm.
For brass players, possibly the equipment they're using, if they're using a jazz mouthpiece. Well, same thing for saxophones too.
Yep.
I've actually been in rehearsals before where directors are allowing students to use jazz mouthpieces in a symphonic setting, and
Hmm.
that's just going to lead to some of the things that you're talking about. So, what was your immediate fix for that? Did you try to really focus on the blend and the balance of the sound? I mean, how were you able to fight through some of that?
Well, what I did is I asked, in this particular group, I asked the kids, I said, do any of you feel like you're overplaying a bit? And actually, a bunch of them raised their hands. And I asked one of the students, I believe it was a trumpet player, I said, would you demonstrate the sound that you're playing with and then tell me what you think? And she did it, and she said, well, I feel like I'm working too hard. And I'm like, okay, great thought. I said, so what would you do to change that? And she goes, well, I'd probably just calm things down a little bit. And I'm like, perfectly. So she played her next sound, and I just said, that is a sound that will blend. The first sound she was playing with would not blend, and she agreed completely, as did the ensemble. And I said, let's try to get more of that sound. And so I kept it pretty simple, but once things got calmed down, the kids immediately heard the difference because they started hearing resonance. They started hearing, when we were working on a major triad, they started hearing the chord clearly. So I think it's a matter, I really do think it gets, and I know I've already said it, but I think it gets back to the sound in your head. What are you after? And what are you trying to model? And I think if you don't know that, if you don't have that sound in your head or can describe it clearly to your kids, it makes things a little tough to sound good.
Yeah, and I think what I've seen you do with ensembles many times, and what you did in that particular instance is you experiment a little bit. One
Absolutely.
player,
Yeah.
you start with one player, and then maybe you add two or three more, and you try to get them to blend together and play with the same
Yep.
approach. And then, kids, I think what we find is kids are pretty resilient, pretty smart, fairly receptive to change most of the time.
Yep.
And when you have that, you can make those minor EQ adjustments or approaches to concepts of sound, and be able to get things to happen. And then I'm sure you probably took that and applied it to a chord or applied it
Yep.
to a phrase, and then you start getting them to conceptualize things a little bit differently. So that's great information.
Yeah, we actually applied it to a couple of phrases in their music, and it did make a big difference, especially in the ballad that they were playing, in the lyrical piece that they were playing. So again, just reminding everyone to, if you're not sure, sometimes it's great to have some other ears in the room. Bring in some other folks and ask them if you think your sound is appropriate, especially for the literature that you're playing.
Yeah, which speaks again to having a mentor, constantly seeking more information, constantly being a learner, constantly going to professional development conferences that are relevant, like the Consumer Institute and the Marching Arts Institute. Great ways to continue to develop your craft and have more than one way. Because I know that there were many times where I would become frustrated as a teacher if I didn't have more ways to approach or solve a problem. Um, and that can be very, very frustrating as a music educator. So the motivation to go to those conferences when you forget about what it was like to go to conferences pre-COVID, very, very important.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's just keep getting better. I was around some great people this weekend. Travis Cross, director at UCLA, Gary Hill, who used to be at Arizona State. Some great people, and we were actually sharing books we had read back and forth, and we were talking about the fact that even with our experience levels, if we don't keep learning, we just kind of die in front of our groups. We don't have anything new to offer, or we don't have that new energy. So it's so important to be, and we hear about it all the time. A lifelong learner, but in our profession especially, it's critical to be a lifelong learner and be willing to be.
Absolutely. And we'd like to think, as Paula Kreider has said before, old people know stuff. So
Yeah, yeah,
don't be afraid to ask us senior citizens, uh, who've been around the block a few times and mostly learned from our mistakes how to approach things. We can certainly, and we're certainly willing to help you. So keep
absolutely.
at it. Keep at it, everybody. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week on Coffee Talk.
Thanks for joining us, folks. Take care.